Okay, good morning to everyone. It's great to see you all here. Before we start, just kind of a bit of background, right? I think there's little doubt that AI is transforming the world. It's likely to transform even more, but which direction, we don't know yet, right? But one thing that we can already see is that these benefits are not distributed evenly, right? 60% of supercomputing capacity are based in the US, China, and Germany. Other places are what we could be calling compute deserts, right? With many regions with no access to high-performance computing. Businesses, for instance, sometimes they're obliged to use other facilities in other places under controlling jurisdictions of, say, so to speak, their competition, right? Now, if you add to that funding for research and capacity on AI, right? And disparities in which type of data is used to train AI models, we see a new digital divide emerging and a gap that can become even larger than what we observe now, or what we call the first generation of digital divide on the internet era. So the challenge to this panel here is not a small one. It is to try to think how can we ensure that the benefits of AI are more evenly distributed. So let's dive in, first starting with Kristel. So Kristel, for small countries like Estonia, right? How do you deal with inequality in terms of access to resources to create a vibrant AI ecosystem?
Good morning, everyone. And so Estonia, in fact, is a small country, although I often get told off when I say that Estonia is small. I'm supposed to say it's compact. But it doesn't change the fact that actually we don't have that many resources and we don't have huge talent pools to draw from. So we have to make strategic and very clever decisions. So we need to, and I actually think that it's all about collaboration. There's no point trying to reinvent the wheel on your own and trying to do it in isolation. So here in Estonia, when you don't have that many people, you have to decide which projects you're going to invest in, which people will work on different subjects and so on. And often you don't have that many people, so you need to make sure that you work together with the private sector, you work with academia, and of course you work with different countries from all over the world, because doing things together, you don't have to make all your mistakes on your own. You can learn from others' mistakes, although often we like to make our own mistakes. But it's such a waste of energy and time and money, so we can't really afford that. So to my mind, it's all about collaboration, and it's the only way forward.
And in terms of access to compute, how do you collaborate?
Again, so we are a small country. Obviously, we cannot afford having our own a big supercomputer somewhere because we just don't have the resources. So, for example, we go to Finland's Lumi, for example, and they help us. We see them as our good partners, and we can learn from them. We can see what kind of mistakes they have made, and we can avoid those mistakes and just put the might all together and just do things together.
Great, thank you. So, I mean, Stefan, Kristel just mentioned this collaboration in terms of like shared access to compute, right? We see this pattern emerging in other countries, which seems to be a good way of doing, instead of like everyone gets their own compute and perhaps not even use all of it, right? But I mean, what does it take for this type of collaboration to happen, right? What would you say are the enabling conditions for this kind of collaboration happens, and what can we do to push it even further?
Well, first we have to look at what actually enables the fact that we have Lumi. Lumi, for those who don't know, is the supercomputer up in eastern part of Finland with the highest capacity in the whole of Europe. it's a resilience question as well, in a sense. You have to differentiate yourself somehow in not being totally dependent, like you mentioned before, on those countries. And it's been a very sort of thoughtful governmental decision since a long, long time, combining then the sort of access to renewable power, access to very high-speed networks, and then also the possibility to offer that kind of capacity for the companies. Because it's also a competitiveness issue in many ways, because if the researchers in Finland and the companies in Finland do not have that access, they cannot compete on a global level. And just as a practical example, if you are a researcher in the US and working with a topic with very high demand for computational power, it can take 2 or 3 months before you actually get access to that kind of a computer. We can provide that access almost immediately. So it becomes a little bit like HPC or quantum as a service instead of anything else. And then Estonia, of course, as a good neighbor, is one of the prime clients, if so to say. And I see it also, it doesn't make sense for every country to have their own computer in a sense, because collaboration and sort of is the key to everything when you look forward on those issues. But you have to have a longer term vision in mind when you look at it. It doesn't happen overnight, and you don't build a computer like that overnight. It takes effort and time to do it, and even the present government now has set aside again additional, I think, 270 million to enhance the capacity of Lumi, so that we would still be ahead of that one, providing the services to our companies. And in all honesty, I mean, the Finnish AI company Silo AI, that was just sold for 650 million. It wouldn't exist without Lumi, because they had that competitive advantage with getting all that computational power all the time when they were working on these different language models.
Perfect, thank you. So collaboration is key.
Yeah.
So going from there and thinking also in terms of the private sector, Nicola, Mastercard, using AI is a bit nowadays part of your daily operations, right? And you get an amazing expertise, not only in terms of the use of AI, but also how to leverage the data that you already have, right? Still on this notion of sharing and collaboration, can you tell a bit how Mastercard works, for instance, with governments in terms of like sharing its expertise and helping build a healthier ecosystem?
Sure. Maybe first a bit of an update on what Mastercard does in the AI space to our own operations. So we've been focused on this space for more than 2 decades because of the sheer volume of our business. Today we are present in more than 250 markets. We connect 3 billion consumers to our payment network. We enable every year 140 billion transactions, payment transactions in real time. And so we've had to learn early in our history on how to basically manage large quantity of data in a very effective way. We also develop within the network with our partners, which are the banks, services that are aimed at preventing fraud. So we have a technology in our network called cybersecurity technology, which in 2023 prevented $30 billion of fraud on the network. So we're able to anticipate through AI what some of the fraudulent transactions are going to be and basically stop them. So that's what been at the core of our network. Over the last few years, we started to think about how do we share the knowledge, the technology, the expertise, the network capabilities in broader sector than the one which is focused on financial service. So we built a number of partnerships with governments around the world. First, we established one of our own AI development labs in Vancouver, Canada. Last year, we partnered with the UAE Office for Artificial Intelligence, and we created a second lab over there. And the idea of these labs comes from a major learning that we basically developed in the last few years. No organization in the public or private sector can innovate and focus on consumer protection in isolation. We have to do this through public-private partnerships. So in those labs, you see the co-development of solutions, not only fraud and cybersecurity, but broader solutions like tourism, which are basically co-designed. Only by co-design and co-development we'll be able to basically solve the 2 major challenges in our view. One is the inclusiveness of AI, and second is the consumer protection innovation.
Yes. There's a brilliant example of where public sector wins, private sector wins, but also the consumer wins, right? And on still, like what emerges is the idea of collaboration, right? And Fabro, I understand that ITS Rio starting to build a coalition, so to speak, in which you can bring this type of collaboration to make AI more inclusive to a next level. Could you tell us a bit more about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the temporary name we have for that is Gavi for AI. And I will upload a paper, a QR code for the white paper that we have about it. Let me make two disclaimers. First, if you know what Gavi is, this is not a Gavi spin-off. This is inspired by, for the 20 years of governance, this is to show that it works. If you don't know what Gavi is, it's a global alliance for vaccines and immunization. Basically, countries, foundations come together to purchase together vaccines, lower the price, and increase access. This is what we believe we need right now for computing power. So we are advocating that governments, foundations come together to buy computing power. Can be GPUs, can be hours of processing, and so on, and share it. This will reduce the price, so everybody has access, and increase access to everyone. So Finland, for example, has a supercomputer. They already shared its resources, but if we have an alliance, we can really share knowledge and research and hours. Mastercard will certainly have data analytics and models. We can share that as well. Three quick reasons why we need this right now. The first one is that Latin America has 2% of data centers in the world. Brazil has half of it. I come from Brazil. But it's very little. We need more computing power. Second thing, we are looking at large language models, LLMs. But there is a possible future that small language models, especially for training for companies, for proteins, for minerals, and so on, it might be a great thing. For SMLs, you don't need the top-notch GPUs. You can have many kinds of computing power to solve it. And third, and lastly, from the inclusion point of view, if we don't share with the global majority computing access, we're going to have less diversity. And less diversity just means that we're going to have less inclusion, because the problems in the global south are very different from other problems. We need local capacity to build solutions and explore AI possibilities.
Yeah, and less diversity, less collective intelligence with growing artificial intelligence, we won't be in good shape, right? But as you starting dialogue, have some governments, foundations started to express some interest on this idea?
Yeah, the white paper is in the QR code, and we are pushing forward the idea for the last 3 months. We know Brazil has a partnership with Spain that does exactly that. We know Switzerland have something alike for African countries. EU, for sure, for European countries, is doing something like. I would say the shortcoming of these initiatives is that they are not thinking globally. The Gavi helped and worked it because it was a huge purchase model for something that was scarce. So all these technologies, all these initiatives, they are great, but they just say that we can be more ambitious.
Perfect, perfect. Now, let's assume we all have the computing power that we need. We still have come to the sometimes thorny issue of regulation, right? So again, I'll start with Kristel. I mean, Estonians are famous for being very practical people. You like to do it, right? That's why Estonia is where it is on so many areas. Particularly in government, right? How do you strike a balance between getting things done, not being left behind, but still making sure that regulation or at least standards are in place?
So I guess it's very hard to regulate something that is unknown to you, and if you don't know how things actually work, it's very hard to regulate it. So that's probably why we've tried to experiment and actually understand how things work and what kind of problems can appear. And yes, we are very practical people, and we like to get things done, and we always think that once we try things out and we find out what the problems are, then we'll think about regulations. And so 99% of our services are online, and we often joke about it. We say, just like Finns, Estonians don't like to talk to anyone, so when you get things done online, you just have it done. You don't have to go and talk to someone. However, when it comes to regulations and when it comes to building new tools and AI solutions, again, we don't have that many people, so we have to make sure that we are able to provide best services, and we don't waste any of the resources we have, as they are really limited. Here, again, we don't have that many. When you talk about people in AI in Estonia, everyone knows everyone, and you don't have that many. In some countries, maybe you have thousands or hundreds at least. We don't have hundreds even. So we have to be very clever, and we need to find clever solutions. So we always know that we need to experiment first, and often some countries have even said that they are really slow moving, and when we work together, they can come up with long guidelines and documents on how to do things. Estonians don't have the resource to actually write those long documents, and we are very bad at it as well, because we don't like words. So working together, coming together, they have the idea, and maybe we can become this sandbox or this test bed where we can actually make things happen and see if it works or not. And in the process, we of course gain experience and learn how to do things. And another example, for example, is large language models. Again, there aren't that many people in the world who can speak Estonian, and us trying to build our own large language model that understands our language and culture would be very, very expensive and not possible to actually achieve. But again, if we come together with Finland, our languages actually are similar, and many other Scandinavian or European countries, again, it would make much more sense, and together we could do things and push forward.
That's very good one. I think not reinventing the wheel, right? Again, collaborating, and perhaps some could learn this lesson from the Estonia model: less memos and more demos, right? Now, Nicola, again on regulation and standards, Mastercard joined recently the US AI Safety Institute Consortium on standards, right? Can you tell us why that is important for Mastercard and what role Mastercard plays into that?
Sure, it's very important for a very simple reason. Our business is purely based on trust. So we enable all those transactions between parties and people that don't know each other, and we're in the middle of this. And I will argue AI today needs the same type of degree of trust, both, as I mentioned before, in terms of consumer protection, as well as innovation. So we joined the program. We commend the work that the Department of Commerce in the US did to bring us together, the public and private sector, to have the conversation about trust. We also commend the work that the EU AI Act did. The EU is developing a very careful balance between protection and innovation, which we think should inspire other governments and should be starting to address the splintering of policy and regulatory solutions starting to happen around the world. In a similar way, I will argue, in which in our world, financial services, the EU started to regulate and legislate on open banking more than 10 years ago. Open banking, the idea of portable data from consumers, from institution to institution, unleash a huge amount of innovation, a huge amount of fintech and startups in Europe and the rest of the world, which then basically benefit our business. So it's in our interest and in the interest of the ecosystem to be focusing on trust and on very solid, simple, concrete policy and regulatory frameworks, which are going to fuel the evolution of AI.
Perfect, perfect. And speaking of EU AI Act and models of regulations, Fabro, some emerging economies, sometimes they tend to mimic regulations from other countries, right? So for example, lots of countries adopted similar legislation as GDPR, right? Now coming to AI, can you tell us about the Brazilian experience on recent attempts to regulate AI?
Yeah, I think Brazil is a good case of Brussels effect on EU AI Act. The discussion now is on risk-based approach, regulating uses by technology as well. And I would say this is not a good case of Brussels effect. GDPR has a good experiences that it was the first standard, and everybody kind of followed that. So we have the things of consent that can use to design cookies. Differ a little bit, but it's a standard we can compare. The EU AI Act is a technology that, based on technology that's very new. ChatGPT, GenAI just kind of ruined the idea that you regulate uses and not technology. Now, if you use GenAI, here are some obligations you have to follow. Our first draft Bill of Law was pretty much inspired by the EU Act, but we tuned it in to be even more protective. So it's way more about risks than benefits. There is a U-turn in Europe that we should pay attention to implementations, development. The agenda is coming to Brazil, but I would say that a huge challenge for Latin America, Chile, Costa Rica, and Brazil at least, is that we look to the risk-based approach. We are doing ex-ante regulation without proper data, without having the same power that other ecosystems have. So if you think about digital markets, a risk-based approach in Brazil basically kills the national market for AI and concentrates. We have seen this on health, on education, and others. So this is why I say that EU Act, it's a bad example of Brussels effect. And I would say that will also be bad for Europe, because Brazil will have a different standards. Costa Rica, another one. Chile is another one. If you want to import, export to Latin America, will not be as simple as GDPR. It will actually be different animals talking to each other, which means bureaucracy, costs, and then challenge ahead.
So a good reminder of the externalities of regulation as we go, right?
And look at what Japan is doing, what US, what UK, Australia. We do have other ways of doing the sandbox that Estonia approach, that Estonia advocates for. It's a very good way to say, let's first understand what the problem is, where public interest can be benefit, and regulate towards that. And not making assumptions that might actually not only be wrong, but create the scenario we're trying to avert.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so not regulating AI, but also regulating for AI, so that AI can enable things to happen, right? Which brings us to more like practical issues, right? So, for example, in the public sector, and it's for Kristel, right? In the public sector, I mean, adoption of technology, it's always difficult, right? Estonia, of course, is an outlier in that case. But with AI, which is a technology that is evolving permanently, there's lots of uncertainties, some degrees of fear, perhaps resistance, but of course, obviously, all the opportunities. How do you make sure that the public sector makes the most of AI?
So I guess it's all about knowledge and skills. So people need to understand what AI enables them to do and what the risks are as well. So for example, in my organization, we are really focusing on the skills of people, and so we have developed different training programs, and then they can start from the very basic training sessions where we just talk about what AI is and that it is not just ChatGPT or generative AI, that there's so much more. Then we talk about the risks all the time. Then we move on about generative AI, for example, because again, developing your own tools can be quite costly. So maybe making use of all those ready-made solutions that you can tweak a bit maybe makes more sense for us, again, because we are a small country. And then we move on to custom GPTs, for example, and it's quite nice to see when some of my colleagues working on different projects suddenly realize that now they are able to do something within just minutes, and in the past they spent hours and days even on things. So there are so many opportunities, but then of course, as we move on, we talk more and more about risks and what they should do and what they shouldn't do. And again, I guess learning from like again, you can read books about it or guidelines or whatever, long regulations and documents, but you don't really learn unless you test it, you try it out, and you see what you can do and what you cannot do. So again, learning from your experience, I think, is the best way, not just reading. So getting your hands dirty is the best way.
Fantastic, fantastic. Stefan, in the case of Finland, right, what measures is the government taking to make sure that the country also makes the most of AI, right? Both in the public sector, but also in the broader economy, I mean, specific actions.
Well, first I could say that Finland was one of the first countries in the world that sort of instituted a strategy for AI, a national strategy for AI, and that was already in 2017, way before any kind of GPT models and things like that. And it's all about AI literacy, really, in a sense. And this was also a part of something what we called Elements for AI. That was a project created by a private company and the University of Helsinki that educates people on what AI is really all about. And it's online, it's global. I think it's translated to now 15 different languages, and everybody can use that one. And just as a practical example, I have done this course together with my kids, they are now 15 and 18, but we did it 2 years ago, and with my father, who is now 84. So it's sort of overarching, also bridging the generations in that sense of understanding what AI really is. And I mean, technology works when you don't see it. That's the best way of having technology to work for you. And when you have that was a sort of red line strategy throughout everything what you do as a government, I think it's a really, really good policy. And it helps people, because if people don't understand the technology, they become afraid. And when people are afraid, they start thinking in a different way, being polarized, and then they start voting in a different way. And I think we have seen this kind of actions also in Europe. We have these populist parties in Poland, in Finland, in Estonia, in Germany, in the US, everywhere. And it's really the sort of that people are afraid of technology, and people are afraid of that some abstract thing called AI comes and takes your job. But the more they understand about it, how it works, what it is and what possibilities it offers, the better it is. I think that's really a key thing. And it also, when businesses understand it, individuals understand it, it's a giant leap forward in so many ways. Also, smart cities operate on AI in today's world. Healthcare systems you can get so much more benefits out of it. And when we implement these things, then everything works much more easy than in other ways. But you have to have a sort of, it's a combination of innovation, of kind of inclusivity, and also from an ethical point of view, you have to look into these three issues, and I think that's really the best way forward.
Fantastic, fantastic. So technology is a bit like good design, right? It should fade in the background and make things happen.
Yeah.
Right. And so, yeah, you mentioned kids, like real people actually getting benefits from it, which brings, this conversation sounds very abstract, but at the end of the day, it's about citizens, businesses, and end users. And Nicola, we were talking, and you mentioned some very interesting collaborations and like solutions really reaching real users. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Sure. We've been launching a number of programs on AI, particularly focused at the micro and small enterprises. And the objective has been to say, how do we democratize AI, reach those layers of the economy and the society who are not touched by this yet? And how do we leverage on our assets, capabilities, network, and investment? So 2 programs that I wanted to maybe quickly mention. One is last summer, we launched with data.org a program called AI to AI, which is artificial intelligence to accelerate inclusion. It's basically a global competition with a $2 million prize for the winner, aimed at stimulating the development by fintech, GovTech, tourist tech, and other technology companies for solutions which are designed with inclusion in mind, both for citizens and small enterprises. The winner is going to be announced in early 25, so next year. The interesting piece to me is not only what the winner is doing, but the fact that you now have hundreds of companies and individual entrepreneurs that submitted the idea, and they keep developing it with or without the Mastercard prize. So we've been able to unleash some of this innovation. We plan to connect some of those to our network. We see ourselves as a network that will enable the development and the scaling of these type of solutions to billions of consumers. So that's one way to look into this. This program was run by our Center for Inclusive Growth, whose objective is to focus on these type of programs. The second one links to tourism. So tourism is quite important for Mastercard because we enable cross-border transactions and payments. We are loyalty platform providers. It's a very interesting business for us. And so during the pandemic, we started to work in Paris on a program called the Barometer of Parisian Tourism. So when the businesses were shut down, we were able to share dashboards and insights with the tourist agency, the Chamber of Commerce, and small and medium businesses in Paris. First of all, to help understand whether a shop or activity was open or not. We could ping the point of sale on the specific shop. If it was active and transacted, that means that that shop was open. Second, to these tourist operators, usually small, we provided data when the corridors were reopening to helping them understand who was actually driving into Paris. Where did they come from? From what type of origin markets or cities? What would people from those markets spend when they were in Paris in the past, where they were basically going into competing destination? So we started to share these services. Yet, we saw, of course, that a small enterprise, a small baker, was not interested in looking at the dashboard with charts and spites. So we work in Spain with Tour España, which is the national destination marketing agency of the government, with Microsoft and a local data company, and we launched last year a pilot, in fact now is a rollout program, in Marbella, where we inserted a ChatGPT functionality. So today, the baker in Marbella can query the system and say, who's going to come into Marbella in the next 2, 3, 4 weeks, 2 months? Where do consumers anonymize come from? What do they spend and what type of products do they consume when they come here or when they go to Italy? And now we see some of those micro-enterprises being able to adapt some of their services, their offers and so on, to the specific type of consumer. So something that was used to be the environment for large retailers, large banks, is becoming used and democratized for very small businesses that will never be able to develop or buy a solution, but basically gets it from the local governments. So these are some of the ideas which are starting to basically bring and float the innovation at any level of the economy. Our t-shirt version is powering economies by empowering people, and that's what we're starting to focus on right now.
Fantastic. One of the things that I like about this story is also about using technology to lower the transaction cost for people to make sense out of the data.
Absolutely.
Right? And I mean, talking about tourism, when we talk about tourism, we talk about culture, right? And we're talking earlier about countries developing their large language models, Fabro, and I know there may be some unexpected effects, for instance, as we're kind of like training data and so on and so forth on potential effects on the creative industry. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, the Brazilian AI strategy plan has a very interesting idea. They want to create that LLM that speaks Portuguese and share it with Portuguese-speaking countries like Angola and Mozambique. They allocated around 20 million euros to do that, and they want to do it in a year, which is possible, although for government it's ambitious. What I really like about this idea is two things. First, the impact it has on society. So Brazil has a model. It started in university, now it's private sector. It's called Sabiá. Sabiá was released before GPT 3.5. It has a benchmark of 75% of accuracy, but a cost of 10%. And for SMEs, this is a huge difference. So you can have access to this kind of technology for a tenth of a price. For SMEs, makes a huge difference. But the second challenge involved in that is actually paying for copyright, paying for creative economy. So we know how easy it is for models to find a loophole and be trained on copyrighted materials. A paper this week said that all Hollywood materials are inside 150 models just because there was a sub website online and they used these subtitles to kind of see the movies by subtitles. Is it illegal? In many cases not, but it basically doesn't return money to Hollywood, to the creative economy. So what Brazil wants to do, and I think is interesting, is that artists want to sell their work to train this LLM that speaks Portuguese, and the government wants to pay back the authors for their creative economy, music, videos, poems, and so on. If we find the right way to, by code, define who is going to be paid and to what share, that will be transformative. At the moment, very few are being paid. Only big brands will have agreements for trainings. So from the global majority, this means that we will not be paid. In 5 years, this might be a danger for the creative economies. So the challenge, the opportunity now is that if you're going to train an LLM that speaks Estonian or Finnish and so on, how do we pay fair payment for creative economies? Those who want to sell the work, and for governments, for example, that want to pay for this work to be used.
Is there a place to have a kind of like Creative Commons type of license?
Well, it can be a Creative Commons, yeah. Wikimedia has just released that data set in Hugging Face. They don't own the data, so it's not Creative Economies licenses, but they basically say that if you use, retribute to us, reach out to us, and there's a responsibility if you're using our data.
Okay. Well, I think we covered lots of ground, so just we don't have much time, but I'd like to know for those here, if there anybody would like to, any questions or comments from the public? All right. Okay, so perhaps just like 30 seconds for to each one of you on what takeaway you think you'd like the audience to take. So I'll start with Nicola, then Stefan, Kristel, and Fabro.
Sure. A couple of comments. First of all, I've been in the digital business for the last 30 years. That's where I started my career. And I've been fascinated by a theory developed by a professor called Carlota Perez of Sussex University. They wrote this book called Technology Revolution and Financial Capitals. So Carlota went back 200 years and looked at all technology revolutions in our world, and saw basically how revolutions are starting with a big set of investments, a hype, a bubble that usually basically burst, and then more sustainable business models and financial investment coming into the technology. From barges in England to television to automobile to the internet and now to AI programs. I will argue that AI has gone through 3 of those curves in the last 20 years. I started to work on this space 20 years ago, which means to me that this technology is here to stay. It's evolving, it's becoming very pervasive, and it's becoming a part of the fabric of our economies and our societies. So if you think about what works into this space, in my view, are 4 areas, so we need to come together and work on. One is leadership. What is the leadership from the public and the private sector in assessing the opportunities and in managing the risk? Second is governance. How do the sectors come together from a policy, regulatory, but also from a development and program launch perspective? Are there large demonstration programs globally? We set the stage on how AI is going to be able to evolve in the future. The third thing is competencies. We have a huge gap between the public and the private sector. We've seen, of course, a bleeding of expertise and talent from the public to the private. How do we basically stimulate the bringing back? What type of programs could develop to second people into the two sectors? And the last piece, which is the less important, is technology. I would argue technology is there, more than what we need for the use cases we need to solve. But if you don't focus on the previous 3 topics, we're not going to be able to deploy technology in an efficient way.
Yeah, where to start really? I'm segueing a little bit from what Nicola said in a sense, because what we have seen now with technology and AI, we have just scratched the surface. The impact will be in the next 12 months, maybe 10-fold, maybe even 100-fold more effective, more productive than what we have seen. And this is just the reality. And it means that technology in today's world impacts, in my world, what I'm working with, it's the main impact of foreign policy, security policy, defense policy, trade policy, human rights, democracy. It's technology. And the change is so vast that I many times challenge people when I talk to them and say that if you don't like change, try irrelevance. And that wakes them up in many ways. And of course, then the next suggestion is then that my favorite quote today is that think outside the algorithm. Forget the box. Think about the algorithm. And there you go. So change is upon us, and we just have to embrace it, and we have to educate ourselves constantly. Otherwise, we are falling behind.
Thank you. Kristel?
So I definitely agree what has already been said. So, but just to stress again, so collaboration is key, and educating people is key. So I know that there are some people who often say that maybe it will just go away somewhere. AI is gonna, maybe one day I wake up and it's just gone. It's not gonna happen. And so you have to make people realize that it's not gonna happen. And when they say that all those horrible machines are going to take away my job, and that's why I don't want to know anything about it, you have to make them again understand that it's not the machines, it's other people who can use those machines. So why not learn about it a bit more and learn how to use those machines? So that's the key.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I'll do my closing remarks on the Gavi for AI. We had a white paper. If you want to hear more, please let us know. Hopefully by February we have a pre-launch of the consortium. That said, I think one of the benefits for Gavi for AI is sustainability. So data centers. Finland is very good for supercomputers for temperature. Brazil for renewable energy and so on. 21% of the energy in Ireland is being consumed by data centers. So if you want to have green data centers, if you want to have greener AI, we need to share not only the purchase of equipment, but also the better use of processing resources, water, energy, and so on. And I think that a global coalition can be a strong force to make that happen.
Okay, thank you very much. Look, I think we covered lots of grounds. I have 1 second left. So I just want to thank you, our panelists. A round of applause to them.